You're good to go, Your Worship.
Okay, I will now call to order a Committee of Council meeting on Monday, September 28, 2020 at 6 p.m. at the W.C. O'Neill Arena Dining Room. Recording of attendance, I note that all members of council are in attendance with the exception of Councillor Akaji and Councillor Bishop, who are not with us this evening. I will now look to a motion to approve the agenda as written. Councillor Drew, thank you, and it's seconded.
I'd like to amend the agenda to have a discussion about our start time, for 6 p.m. start time. Perhaps it's a point of order on the meeting, but I would like to have a discussion about what time we start our meeting. I'm not sure if I'd like to add that as a motion or just have a general discussion or have time.
Your Worship, maybe under, we could call that two.
Okay, I'd like to have two. Motion to discuss our 6 p.m. start time for a meeting.
Okay, that's fine. We need a seconder for that. Councillor Harrison, thank you. I guess that's all we need, isn't it? For a seconder, we go forward. So we will add that to the agenda. Thank you, Worship. Oh, Councillor Appleby. Okay. I'd like to amend the Mr. Knopper, we can amend the Councillor Appleby is on the list. Okay, so now I will look, we do have a motion, look for a motion to approve the agenda as amended. And a seconder. Councillor Drew and seconded. Councillor Dumichel.
No, Councillor Drew did second it, Your Worship. He already moved it. Good try.
And I think I made amendments, so I can't second.
No, that's okay. So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right, so Councillor Drew moves and Councillor Dumichel seconds. Okay, good. That's fine. All in favor of the agenda as amended, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. I'll now look to declaration of conflict of interest on any matter before us tonight. Seeing none, we have no presentations, and we will move directly to the review of wording of any bylaw and motions to be presented at the regular or special meeting of council. We'll move to the standing committees, and we'll move down to public safety. Councillor Green. Thank you, Councillor Drew. Can I have a second for that motion? Oh, sorry, we don't need it. These are getting more confusing.
Your Worship,
Yes.
I know that I was away. Did we get the answers? And I can follow up with staff. Did we get the answers that we were looking for last time this motion was brought forward? Just because we brought it before, and then we tabled it, and then I was just wondering if everything we were wondering if we've got all the answers we were looking for, and I can follow up with staff on that since I was away.
Well, no, I think we can. Mr. Spear.
thank you, Your Worship, and Deputy Mayor. I guess the one answer was, do we have an alternative? We do not, because St. Stephen isn't able to meet the requirements to be a dispatch center and any regulations. The second was about the charges. Took me a while, but I figured out who was in charge. I went through 3 different departments, I guess the issue we have is we're probably not going to be in a position to negotiate, but we could be in a position to ask questions and to determine what best steps are moving forward. But it will be staff's recommendation to have us approved so we can get in line for the extra equipment. But the council should proceed and have discussions. It ended up being part of the Department of Environment and Local Government that actually came up with the pricing model for this. So it took me a while to find out the right people that got an email last week. We were getting somebody send an email this week and find it.
Councilor Grew?
If we look at the comments, and I passed this on to the CEO and we had a bit of an opportunity to negotiate the rate. But if you look at the comments on Stephen and George and the fee per capita on a per person basis, the town of St. Steve works out to $4.99 per person. Town of St. George, $5.75 per person. Town of St. Andrews, $11.46 per person. And that is because we have a very high assessment base, and the fees are based on a multiplication of the 0.0064 times the assessment base. And what I suggest to the CEO, perhaps we can approach the same time for the police commissioner with this data and say perhaps you might want to reconsider or revise that number of 0.0064 and make it something like 0.0032 or something to bring that in line with the per cost. The other thing that I noticed is in Article 9.02, it says the annual fee will be readjusted for positive tax-based growth. It doesn't talk about if our tax base goes down. So the rate won't be adjusted, readjusted if our tax base goes down, it won't be adjusted if the tax base goes up. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at in the deal with the police board. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Grew. Any other comments, Council?
Yeah, Your Worship, I'm just, if we bring it forward again, I don't want to necessarily table it. I'm just having a hard time swallowing this pill that it's one option that we're given as a municipality when the terms aren't fair. They're not fair for the taxpayer of St. Andrews. And the problem is you'd like to fight it, but the reality is they've got us in a hard place because we're running out of time. To be honest, I don't want to vote in favor of the motion next week, but yet I feel like we're not going to get an answer that we need. And it's either have no service or vote on a motion that's terrible, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
I hear what you're saying, but at least if we move it forward, we'll have an opportunity to debate it at first reading. It may not. We can always stand it down again, and maybe we'll get a different minister by next week. So who knows? Councilor Grew?
I would suggest we maybe if we go in there and we take that 0.0064 and then that to be 0.0032 or something like that, and pass that as a council and then go back to the same John board of police commissioners. So this is what council approved. We may accept it. And then we can present them with the logic behind our decision. And then let them come back and say, well, no, we don't think that's good. That way their council is not passing something that they don't think is reasonable. And we're going back to the St. John Board of Police Commission, something that they're powerful. And we can lose the process.
Your Worship, is there any way to put, as part of that we submit Councilor Grew's background on the per person cost? And the worst they're going to say is no.
Yeah, exactly. In order to do that, though, we have to bring that forward next week. So I think that's what we need.
So should we do it? Let's amend that right now. Mr. Spear, are you comfortable doing that? I think it's worth a try.
Yeah, I mean,
At
like
the
you
very
said-
least, if they say no, at least they know that we're not happy with the terms.
no, and there's a precedent for it anyway, because the provincial contract with the RCMP, from what I understand, is a combination of assessment and population, not just one or the other, so it's not unheard of. It's, you know, I'm with everybody. I don't think they'd ever shut our service down. They just may come back and say, you've got to be joking. But nonetheless, it could be worth a discussion for sure, to make our point. And
Same with the second point on the positive tax base, that Council did point out, 902.
yep.
We can just say, shall be readjusted for tax base changes.
Okay, Mr. Spear, are we, with those changes, can we commit then to bring this forward with those changes next week? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, Your Worship, just discussion motion. So if they want to, I think, as
Yeah.
we'd like to use the term friendly amendment, we could adjust those motions to where you think they should be.
Okay.
And then we'll bring those forward. And if you
So
still
is
like
that-
the wording of what we interpreted, we'll
Okay.
still give you the
Circulate.
opportunity.
Okay, good, thanks. All right, thank you, Councilor. We'll move now to Business, Tourism, Heritage and Culture, Deputy Mayor Henderson. Oh, sorry, yes, well, we do, actually. Sorry, Councilor Harrison, thank you, but sorry.
And motion to yes, 304B, the council will provide 90 days notice in writing to town of St. Stephen of the town of St. Stephen's withdrawal from emergency communications.
Council, everybody good with that? I think that flows for what we're doing. Okay, thanks, Councilor Crew. Now, Deputy Mayor.
Perfect. The reference number is BTHC 2009001A. The subject is the 2021 Business Improvement Area Levy. The background is, as part of the downtown beautification initiatives, the St. Andrews Business Improvement Area collects an annual levy from its members to pay for various projects and events. The BIA, established in 1984, are all business addresses on Water Street from Princess Royal to Elizabeth Street. As per the Business Improvement Act area of New Brunswick, council must set the levy annually by bylaw, which also includes approval of their budget. The motion reads that move that council grant leave for first reading of bylaw 20-07, a bylaw of the town of St. Andrews to impose a special business area improvement levy in the town of St. Andrews.
Everybody good with that? And I assume that we received no representations from the BIA for any changes or anything this year. It's status quo.
I attended their last meeting, Your Worship, and they never brought forward any changes.
Okay, great. Okay,
Your Worship, they did forward me a budget late last week, so that'll be included with the council package.
okay, good. Yeah, that's true. All right.
Oh, Your Worship, sorry.
Yes.
If I may, I know I can't F2 stuff, but I'm going to jump in. Part of the process, you're actually supposed to hold a meeting of objections. We didn't include that with this because we didn't have the budget, but now that we do, would council be opposed to staff working out the date for the meeting of objections to this, including the budget, to advertise it and moving that forward?
I have no objection, council.
Friendly amendment, just add it in for next
Yeah,
week.
just that.
Thank you, council.
All right, now we'll move to Recreation and Community Services. Councilor Gumichaud.
Thank you, Worship. Next one is reference number RCS 200302A, submitted by myself, September 22nd, 2020, and the subject is bylaw 20-08, the bylaw for regulating all terrain vehicles and other vehicles within the town of St. Andrews, first reading. In the background reads, in the spring of 2020, residents of the town of St. Andrews submitted several complaints regarding off-highway vehicles using pedestrian trails. Staff conducted spot observations of the trail, set up trail cameras to catch pictures of off-highway vehicles, and worked with the RCMP on notifications and enforcement. Bylaw 20-08, a bylaw for regulating all-terrain vehicles and other vehicles within the town of St. Andrews, was created to enforce rules on the use of off-highway vehicles in town limits, on trails, and administrative penalties for enforcement measures. The bylaw also highlights the use of electric bikes or e-bikes as a new form of emergent transportation. And the motion reads, move that council grant leave for first reading, bylaw 20-08, a bylaw regulating all-terrain vehicles and other vehicles within the town of St. Andrews.
Thank you. Council?
Your worship, did you guys go through this bylaw and review it in advance? Or is this like, I know we talked about it a long time ago, but is there an opportunity before we go to formal reading just to clarify a couple things in it?
Sure, there is, yep.
I guess I'll start under section 3, regulations 1. So it says, no person, including a driver or passenger, shall ride an all-terrain vehicle within the town of St. Andrews limits. So say I own an acre of land and I decide that I want my wood dropped off and I want to use my wagon behind my four-wheeler to pull it to the side of the house. Are we saying that people are not allowed to use all-terrain vehicles on their own property as well in the town of St. Andrews?
Through your worship, no, that wasn't the option or the thought of it. The premise of the thought was not to have ATVs or all-terrain vehicles driving up and down town roads, on town streets, but within your property limits, you could still use this function to use on your property, but not anywhere without. I guess common areas or roads or roadways should be listed.
Is it possible to add into that people can operate them on their own private property? Like there's property owners just on the cusp of town limits that have a few acres of land that they use it for work purposes.
Through your worship, well, we can make that correction if council's okay with it. I get a double check. It also brings up the point that, you know, golf course, possibly Kingsway, there might be 2 or 3 others that have what could be typically listed as all-terrain vehicles in the day-to-day operation. So we may have to just tidy that up a little bit so it doesn't exclude everything. Okay.
And then we're on para 3.3. Just skim through the bylaw here quickly. I'm just gonna put these here.
Yeah.
So we're saying that if somebody like loads up their four-wheeler, drives it on a ramp at, you know, 9:30 at night when they get home, that they could be subject to a $500 fine.
Through your worship, that is our noise bylaw from 9 p.m. till 7 a.m. So if somebody were to call at that point, if you were backing off your ATV, somebody could technically call you on noise complaint if they wanted.
And that was without this bylaw. It was something that we'd still consider implementing.
Yeah, this is first reading, Deputy Mayor, so staff kind of prepared this set of best practices, but certainly open to lots of suggestions.
Councilor Groot, you had a comment?
I think there's you have some difficulty with 2C, where we're lumping electric motor driven cycles with e-bikes and define those as ATVs. Because that doesn't seem to fit. One of these items doesn't fit. That seems to be out of place, and we suggest that it's a repair seat altogether because it's a completely different kind of fit.
Should we not just put this in the first reading and then we can follow it?
Well, right now we're talking about the wording of the motion, this is part of the wording of the motion. Yeah. And all I'm saying is that I don't think the regulations that we've listed in this bylaw are applicable to
Although Councillor Grew under 4.7, it excludes e-bikes from the being listed as an ATV. I think under 2 is just a definition, so we can establish what exactly is meant by an e-bike. But
Then, yeah, just take out what it said. And just, and you put it forward, if you take out the exemption of vehicles, then it applies to alternate vehicles. Because I think you're mixing two different classes of vehicles. When I think of ATV, I actually think of my own, and I think of e-bike, it's a very, very different image.
But I think, Councillor, that under the definitions, A is the listing is listed as all terrain vehicles, so that has everything. And C is just a separate definition not to be included. Maybe under where it says definitions, combine all definitions in ATV systems, maybe scratch that one, they'll scratch out. Then each of those A, B, C, D, E, F are all separate definitions on their own system. Because it certainly isn't staff's intent to exclude e-bikes, because we know really under that 4.7 right now, it's being suggested to only allow them on the trail network through the town. You might say the trail network and municipal roads or something, but
It seems like it doesn't make sense because you have this whole bylaw that goes on for a number of pages, talking about ATVs, and then you simply, you don't even mention e-bikes until you get to the exemptions. And there's a whole bunch of regulations here that, if you read this bylaw, will apply to e-bikes. And it's sort of like, I don't think that was the intent.
it's not the intent to exclude them, but I think it's the intent that people aren't saying, well, an e-bike's an ATV, that we included the definition and included to exempt it, so people understood an e-bike is still an allowed form of transportation in the town.
Because there are quite a number of e-bikes in town.
Agreed.
And I don't think the intent is to regulate them to the extent that we have here. And I think, as I say, I think the intent, if I'm reading this correctly, the intent is to regulate all terrain vehicles and exclude them from trails, exclude them from driving downtown streets and all this sort of stuff. E-bikes are sort of a completely different category. I think that it's, first off, it's going to be very difficult to regulate e-bikes because you're going to have to try and figure out if it's an e-bike to start with. And then, is it 500 watts and is it traveling over 32 kilometers an hour? I think for the sake of simplicity, just delete those C, remove e-bikes from this bylaw and have it as a bylaw regulating all terrain vehicles. And it's a simple and clean. Thank you.
So, Councilor, just make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying that e-bikes are bikes and all terrain vehicles. Is that essentially?
That's essentially what I'm saying.
So all of the rules that apply to bicycles apply to e-bikes.
Okay.
But there's no reason to add to that for e-bikes in the special, in other words, modifying whatever we have that regulates bicycles to include e-bikes, to make sure that there isn't anything that should be added to regulate e-bikes. I'm assuming we have something, or somebody has something that regulates bicycles, meaning the government or us.
Well, essentially, an e-bike is simply a bicycle that is with a motor.
Right.
And I think the biggest concern with regards to e-bikes is how fast they travel.
Right.
And you can have a 10-speed bike with a very healthy person on it that travels just as fast as an e-bike. So I think the e-bikes and bicycles sort of fall into the same category. And certainly e-bikes do not, I don't think, fall into the same category as an alternative vehicle, which are certainly, I think, implications when it comes to the environment, when it comes to the damage they do, when it comes to all sorts of other things. So,
I think the only thing we're being cognizant of, Councillor, and we're okay with whatever direction council gives, is that these e-bikes are going to turn into electric motorcycles sooner rather than later. And I think it was to try to have a control about how powerful that would fall in before they, because we've had people saying they're, start to pick up speed 50, 60 kilometers an hour.
there's a difference between an electric motorcycle and an e-bike. And one is regulated under the Ohio Traffic Act, the other one's not. And I think that to try and bundle e-bikes into here is just, we're putting it in the wrong place. And sometime in the future, electric motorcycles become a problem, then we can address that at the time. I think that most trans, we lump it in here to more problems. So, thank you.
Your worship, I tend to agree with Councillor Wu. I think perhaps he's certainly on something that removing e-bikes from the bylaw and setting up a separate bylaw that addresses electric vehicles, and that would perhaps more comprehensively include golf carts, the potential for golf carts. That there's past people with limited mobility getting to the gardens, getting to the golf course. It's been stuff that's come up with golf carts, and we have that bylaw include e-bikes and golf carts and other electric forms of transportation. It might be better in the second bylaw. Sorry,
Thank you, Councillor.
So we can do that, Your Worship, but I guess maybe the question is council ready to, with those amendments, take it to first reading, or do you want us to come to work in session later and have a harder look at it piece by piece?
Just one more clarification, is it's around the off-road vehicles that are motorized snow vehicles. Does that mean that someone that has a plow with a four-wheeler is allowed to go out and plow their neighbor's driveway still? Is that why that's in there?
Through your worship, it's not something that was overly considered, open to concepts and ideas. So whatever council wishes within that context, welcome to.
It's quite common in this community for people to go and plow out their neighbor's driveway if they have that means. And I don't think it's something that's been a complaint or a problem in the town of St. Andrews. So if that's the intent of it, I think it's important to leave that in there then.
Yeah,
so if that's included in the bylaw, and then there's an accident with a hypothetically an accident with an ATV and a regular car, and in our bylaws would allow you allowed to have ATVs on the road for whatever reason. Would you be somehow be potentially on the hook for that? It's a vehicle that's not supposed to be on the road. On the road, the vehicles that are allowed on the road.
I guess council has to give direction, because we thought the ATVs was a concern, is why this bylaw was brought forward. But the councillor or the deputy mayor's, I agree, we'll have to have a look at that, but if it's staying on its own property, do you know of people that would go from, like, as opposed to a dump truck or a half ton, be going property to property with that thing?
Yeah,
just usually...
I know, like down in the subdivision, it doesn't happen anymore. So hint, hint, hint. But I know from time to time, I saw it all the time, where there was just a tractor that went across the road or down two houses and helped out their neighbor. There's a lot of seniors in the community that appreciate these people on four-wheelers that are helping them get their driveway clean. So I don't know if there's liability, to Councillor Gumachel's point, but I'd hate to see us so regulated that you can't do a good deed for your neighbor anymore.
No, I've got a problem with that one, because I think the insurance thing overrides that. If you do it, that's great. If you do it at your own risk. And because it's just like the guys who say, well, I'm going to load up my ATV and take it out of town on a trail, but I need gas, so now I'm driving 6 blocks down the road to get gas at the gas station. If you allow them on the roads at all, they're on the roads, right? And he won't be able to regulate it, I don't think. Anyway, let's, Councillor Grimm.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think as with many of these bylaws, the devil is in the details. And if you look at the deputy mayor's point, and you look at the definition of what they say is a motorized snow vehicle, it means a self-propelled vehicle designed to be driven exclusively on snow or ice, which excludes what they talk about there is more or less a snowblower.
What about a snowmobile then? That would fit
Again,
that.
that's not.
That would fit that definition though. It's a motorized snowmobile.
Yep. A snowmobile would, but an ATV, it's not exclusively on snow or ice.
So then what we're saying is it's okay to have snowmobile in the streets? Like there's some flaws in it. I'll leave it at that. There's some flaws in the wording and inconsistencies.
I think we're getting it. E-bikes are bikes and snowmobiles are ATVs that go on snow. And ATVs should be in a bylaw and bikes should be in a bylaw.
I still say we put this at our first reading, so the public can then shred it along with us. And you can all
Well, actually, I agree with you, Councilor Bears. I think we should get it this reading, but I don't know whether our staff can get it back to us with everything we told them tonight by next week. Or whether that's fair to our staff to make them get it.
I would say putting in perfect bylaw out there, and I was amended for a second. You don't touch the power.
Well, you can move it to the next council.
No.
Let's do this thing to do it.
Exactly. Let's take it back to making our adjustments and see if we can bring it forward next week. And then we can always stand it down if we have this debate again next week.
Because I have a totally non-controversial one coming up. PDD 2009018, 127/2020, bylaw 20-06, the bylaw respecting short-term rental residential units in the town of St. Andrews first reading. As part of the municipal planning process, council decided to deal with short-term rentals in the general bylaw. I'm just going to make this up, by the way. Staff was directed to draft in that pencil is attached to a packet tonight. And I'd also like to add that this should be shared with the public and try to get a copy of this draft into all current short-term rental operators' hands as best we can. We can't guarantee it, but let's try. And the motion then moved by Councilor Brantley for first reading of the bylaw, your 20-06, the bylaw respecting short-term rental residential units in the town of St. Andrews, in the town of St. Andrews. I have to listen to things, but
Your worship, again, I know it's because I think you guys talked about this while I was away, so I apologize, but just a couple notes I had under 4.2B. Is there a way to give reference to 16.1? So basically, it's about the fees. So they're getting told that they have to pay the fee, and then they don't find out until the very end of the bylaw that their 3% works against that. And I thought that a lot of people are going to see that and they're going to be like, what, this is the fee? If they were side by side right there, it would provide some early clarity and a lot of calls to town hall and a lot of complaints because they're so far apart in this bylaw. And I've got 5.1E. It says that enter at all reasonable time on the property that is subject to regulation of this bylaw. And I just know that if you get to 8.1, it gives reference to, one second, bear with me. It gives one that basically says that provide access within 48 hours of a request. So I was just wondering, one doesn't give any reference to time and one gives 48 hours. So I don't know if that's for a specific reason, but if you're entering a property, I think that you'd have consistent clause to clause maybe, but just something that jumped out on me on that one. And then the other question is, there's another one, there's 7.4 that says a responsible person must contact at the short-term rental property within 4 hours of being requested by the town agent. And then when you get to 8.1H, it says, ensure that an operator responsible is available for contact 24 hours a day during periods of short-term rental property is rented, and any complaints within 2 hour notification. So it's just, one's 4 hours and one's 2 hours. I just think we need to have some consistent language. And I know one might mean if someone reaches out to them within 4 hours and it's not being rented, and one might mean 2 if it is, but I think that's a really hard thing for people to remember. I think we should just set a consistent time on that to get feedback from the public. And then see if I've got anything else here. We've got to talk about 10.5, obviously, unless you guys talked about it when I wasn't there. And then I got a question, is 13.1 a normal clause under validity that we would put in any bylaw? Just as if a portion of this bylaw is held invalid, like because we think this is invalid, we would do just put it.
It's normal.
It is normal in all, is it? Okay. Because I have. And then the only other thing is I have, sorry to take up time, but I know I missed the meeting and I obviously did the reading. 8.1F, it just says that an operator cannot allow more than 2 adults per room. I was just wondering if that's too heavily regulated. Like there's a lot of hotels that have 2 double beds, and I don't know. If someone has a huge room that they're renting out for 4 adults, like it still seems reasonable. Because it's quite typical to have 2 queen beds in a room when you're renting something. Like there's a lot of Airbnbs out there that have 2 full-size beds in them. So food for thought.
Worship?
Yeah, Councilor Griswold.
Thank you, Your Worship. This whole Airbnb issue is a new use for the town of St. Andrews. It's not something that we've had before. And I think I have to thank staff for, they've done a lot of hard work here trying to strike the balance. But I think that there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done to ensure the quiet enjoyment of adjacent properties. People who haven't experienced, who don't have Airbnbs beside them right now, there needs to be some sort of measures there to protect their quiet enjoyment of their properties. And I think that one way to do that might be in the provisions to have a setback. We have a setback, for example, with the chickens of 10 meters. It seems reasonable that maybe a setback of 10 meters from adjacent properties for an Airbnb might be a reasonable measure. And we could even put in this that the setback requirement specified could be waived at the time of licensing with the written consent of the adjacent property owner, something along those lines, so that, if the neighbors are in agreement, then off you go. The other thing that I think needs further discussion is staff have recommended a number of measures, including the license cap, limiting the number of Airbnbs, limiting the nights that an Airbnb can be available, those kind of things that are not included in the bylaw, that were recommended by staff but haven't been incorporated in this bylaw. So I think we need to have a discussion on those to see, do we as a council agree with the recommendations of staff, and how do we incorporate those into the bylaw? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
In fairness to staff, they have done a lot of work on this. Early on in the process, I stated that I thought we should be regulating short-term rentals just with fees. And that's really all we ought to be doing. A lot of this stuff in here seems like a lot of work for staff. checking the internet, da-da-da-da-da. If we're going to talk about people enjoying their property, you also have to at the same time consider people's right to do what they want with their property, which is similar things to what we went through with the heritage bylaw. You start limiting, telling people what they ought to be doing, they don't tend to like it. If we start doing that with short-term rentals, for example, if I get an opportunity to go away for the summer, or if something comes along and I want to rent my house, I shouldn't have to come and ask the town if that's okay. And that's kind of where we're headed. Now, if the town wants a fee, great. If I do a bad job with renting my house on Airbnb and whatnot, they have their own checks and balances in place so that if you're not a good operator with Airbnb, it won't be too long before you have bad recommendations, and you won't be held in high regard. Also, you won't be getting those fees. So I think we're setting ourselves up with this bylaw for a lot of work, maybe that we don't need to do. And I think we really need to get the word out if we are going to go forward with it, that people are limiting what people can do in their own houses, in their own things that they're heavily invested in, obviously. And I think by restricting that, it's, I think a lot of our townspeople aren't going to like it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councilor Anderson?
In general, I agree with Councilor Michelle that I find this a bit too restrictive. And but I guess more specifically, I guess one question is right now we have this tied into our zoning bylaw and the municipal plan. Is there a way to put a transition in our zoning bylaw that basically says until this exists, we do one thing, but then plan for this? Because my guess is this is going to take a while. Now that I see it, I think we're putting more thought into it. And I'm not sure there is a way to do a transition that has almost like stay the course however we do short-term rentals now in our current zoning bylaw and just let it ride until this is ready, but don't rely on this being ready the same day the zoning bylaw is. And then a more specific question to that, when I look at section 2, and you can have a short-term rental main use in a state residential or forest commercial zone, and as a secondary use in service residential central commercial. Does that mean in the SR zone, if I buy a house, can is this saying I cannot just rent it out as a short-term rental? Then that has to change. That shouldn't go on. People buy homes and rent, like, it's a business here. You know, and so I think that needs to go immediately. And same with mixed use. Any residential, I think those need to be open and just be rentals.
Yeah, well, and this was staff's interpretation of the council's wishes, that's all. So we thought council didn't want that to be predicted blunt. And because we bounced that up a little bit between ourselves, and we thought people were okay with kind of renting out, like Councilor Michelle said, where he was not using his home or having extra space. But there's another clause in there, I think it's still there, about having no more than 2 properties. Just again, we don't want to get into Montreal, Toronto, where the same, like investors are coming and buying up dozens of properties in those larger centers to make them specifically in that model. But again, what I'm hearing is maybe we don't want to take this to this next meeting from the standpoint there seems to be a lot of work that that's fine. We just wanted to bring it up for so people can see what.
The only reason I want to get this in first reading is I want to get, even if we call it a draft, a non-first reading draft, get this out to the public. Try to get it out to as many operators, even if you know people that don't like short-term rentals, just get it to them too. You know, as many people as we can, let's put it in their hands, because I think it will be contentious, and maybe a lot of these people have really good ideas. I know Ms. Carney's often here, and she has some opinions on this. She asked a lot of questions last time, and so I'd like to put this in her hands, because she had a lot of opinions, and so she able to give us good feedback. And there's a lot of other people like her that rent homes, and like the whole home, not just part in our service residential neighborhoods. So I think it's important to get that out there, so we just start bringing in feedback now, and no one can say later that we because, I think quite a few people do use their properties for this purpose, so.
Your worship?
Yes.
I think, I agree with Councillor Harrison. We have to get this out here for a slightly different reason, is that we have to be mindful of the fact that we represent 1,800 people in this town, and the potential Airbnb operators are 49 of those 1,800. So I think that we have to be careful not to just listen to the 49 people and ignore the other 1,750, because I think that this is an issue that could have some pretty dire consequences when it comes to quiet enjoyment of your property. And we have to be mindful of that and put in the appropriate safeguards. And I'm not sure if we've achieved that balance at this point, but I think that the public needs to weigh in on this in a much more, a much larger manner than they have already.
I mean, I don't think I'm that worried, because right now, you may want to say, Councilor Brew, that we don't add this in our bylaw. We have a lot of short-term rentals functioning.
Illegally.
Well, call it what you want, they're functioning, and I've heard one person, I haven't heard many people complain, put it that way, it's specifics. I don't think this is going to be this huge wave of people being scared of places being rented. And either that or we have a lot more thought into where and how. But yeah, I mean, there's quite a few places that are rented now, and I mean, I don't think we get that many complaints. My other, just one more comment, and Councillor Michelle pointed to it in a previous discussion on the bikes or whatever. And I'll have to go through this in more detail, but my other fear before was that if we start inspecting these places and stuff like that, and the town is taking on liability it shouldn't, or doesn't need to take on. Because I don't think we inspect the Algonquin, we don't inspect B&Bs, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong on that. But if there are, I remember we talked about it at one point, that we should inspect for fire plans and stuff like that. I don't know if we really, do we really want to take on that if there is a fire, the town gets sued because we didn't do it right? I mean, I'd rather just, anyways, I think this needs to go legal as well, just to see how much liability we take on if we start playing all these roles, as opposed to just, you pay a fee, like having them sign up, right? Leave it at that.
Councilor
Your worship, one thing I forgot to mention in referencing how this is similar to the heritage bylaw and how townspeople didn't want that. So in response, we prepared the secondary plan with best practices for how people ought to perhaps manage their properties. A lot of the stuff in this bylaw is actually similar to that. It's best practices that a short-term rental operator would want to have, like being accessible in so many hours, So perhaps we should be thinking to prepare some sort of a best practice policy to go along with short rentals, but I don't think we've been able to enforce it. It's as far as I know, the inspection of rentals is a provincial responsibility currently. Like when you go stay in a hotel and there's that little stamp on the back of the door that comes from the province, I believe. I just think we're biting off more than we can chew and limiting people's right to enjoy their own property. If people aren't, if for example, your neighbors aren't running a good operation, then you can complain and then we can look at dealing with it, right? Without setting up all these ridiculous hoops to jump through. It's not a criticism.
Well, I think, if I might comment, I think one of the things I'm concerned about is that we seem to have completely abandoned the notion that we instructed our staff that short-term rentals are interfering with long-term rentals. Do we now believe that's not the case here? Have we changed our position on that? And if so, that's fine. But if we haven't, then we need to make that connection. The other thing is that I've heard a lot of hue and cry about this as we've gone through the last year or so, that We have speculators coming into town, buying up whole properties, turning them into Airbnbs, and then the money all goes somewhere else. They shut them down in the wintertime and they're not available for anybody. If that's good now when it was bad a few months ago, then we need to decide if we've changed our minds, you know, and we can change our minds. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying it seems like some of the big reasons why we set our staff forward to do this were to make it more regulatory and to make people responsible so that we don't get into some of the nonsensical things that we read about in the newspapers about people trashing places, having all-night parties, and no one fessing up to be responsible for what goes on in their property.
My other comment is that's all anecdotal. I mean, like, we never had our planners do a proper study. And this problem going all the way back to our plan. Right. We have that paragraph, still bugs me that we had that there's a significant effect on long-term rentals. Well, we've never done the study. We really don't know. And I don't know if regulating one type of housing or existence is the way to know another type of housing. A lot of these places will never be long-term rentals. No one's going to buy them and rent to students, right? Because they're not, you know, like students aren't always the best to rent to. But if we want to solve that problem, I think we're really going to work with MPCC and build buildings. This is not going to solve that.
No, I tend to agree with you because I've come around to that way of thinking as well. And what I've been seeing more recently from other places in the world is that if a community wants to have long-term housing, we ought to become developers and develop our long-term housing, right? Yeah. And say, this is long-term housing, and then, but I do disagree a little bit with Councillor Goodishell. I think that the secondary municipal plan is not a heritage conservation bylaw, and some of us still think that's what we should have and not. But I do agree that whatever we decide to do, we should have an educational process for the operators so that they can understand best practices on how to run something if that's what they decide to do. Only other one comment is I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Grew, in terms of the setbacks, but that really penalizes people who are probably running good Airbnbs, but they happen to be 2 feet from the property line of their houses. And I see this more as a enforcement of a noise bylaw situation rather than dealing with people who are on the property line, but they have quiet clients and they're not causing any deterioration of the quality of life of the neighbors, right?
I think the setbacks, not to, yeah, impugn voting. Sure, I assume that's just a bit of a poison pill, because either you build a house that looks like a house with normal setbacks that we already regulate, or you have this little skinny thing that fits way away from your neighbors. Yeah. And voices carry anyways, it won't matter whether it's right or another. But yeah, no, I think it is a noise bylaw issue, and which we have issues with that anyways. Right? On more busier summers when there's a lot more traffic going to and from downtown, but sometimes those are good problems. It's good to have to complain about young people or even older people walking home from their cars that want. You need to get alive in town. Yeah.
Yes. So I think when you look at the municipal plan and the intent, it would be that it's a 10-year plan. It really is. It's a multi-year plan. And for the first time ever, we have visibility on Airbnbs with the tourism accommodation levy. We have a baseline right now. So if the intent is that it does not take away from the long-term rentals, is we'll be able to see growth now. You'll be able to see it go from 49 to 55 to 60. What I think staff is actually saying next year is it's expected to go down. And maybe it's COVID, maybe it's the fact that we're charging them 3% for their visitors now. Some of them are deciding not to do it. So we don't have to complete the whole municipal plan right now. And I know that you have to have the wording match, but the reality is in my opinion, you can have statements in that you have to improve housing without having a bylaw to say how you're going to do it. I think we're trying to do too much, too soon, too quick. And the other thing is, I think everybody on council would agree that the people that are coming to St. Andrews and staying here seasonal are getting charged double tax, but trying to find a way to justify continuing to have property in our community. It's important that they have a way in which they can get some revenue to offset that. There's people in our community that actually rent one bedroom out to Airbnb, and it's because they're having a hard time making ends meet. So Airbnb can be a wonderful tool. When everything is booked solid in the community and it's the only resource left we have the infrastructure in this community to hold more than our hotels can do. We've done it. So I think to say that all Airbnbs are going to take away from it, no, absolutely not. But it's about right sizing it. And for the first time ever, we're going to have some visuals on what is going to happen. And one thing that the staff is saying to us right now is we expect it to go down next year. So if we're expecting it to go down next year, why are we adding more regulations this year? If next year goes up, then that will be a conversation for next year's council. If it goes up for 2 years from now, that's the conversation. We know that we're not going to just shut everybody down. You know what I mean? We're not going to just take all these people out of these properties and say you can't rent it anymore. So the question is does this council have to bring in another controversial bylaw? But to be quite honest, I don't think we're ready to do. I'm hearing it around this table. We're not ready to do it. So let's just find out how it can have a municipal plan. It's going to stay in there. Not everything has answers in a municipal plan. And don't try to find them all today. Otherwise, we're just going to push something through quickly, and it might not be the best document for our community.
Worship?
Full disclosure for me, I rent out my cottage on Airbnb, or I have in the past, and it's no simple task. It's actually quite a bit of work to keep and maintain good comments, to keep customer satisfaction high. And there are a number of wonderful Airbnb operators in town, and also people that manage properties for people. But it's not, if you don't do a good job, you're not in business very long. It sorts itself out. And also to the Deputy Mayor's point, COVID is definitely going to hit that section of the industry hard. And so it comes back to if the town wants to be in the game, it probably should be in the game. There's the way you regulate it is through fees, and perhaps attaching some kind of appendix of best practices, and giving people who live adjacent to Airbnb's a means to lodge a complaint. So if you have some bad tenants, say at your Airbnb, not only can you give them a bad review, but your neighbors would have a way to let the town know that there's a problem there, and we can follow up on that. But I don't know about some of these, some of the amounts of some of these penalties and everything else, and whether we'll really be able to enforce it. Perhaps they pay a little more on their fee in the following year if the complaints are warranted. Maybe we can do it that way. But you know, in rentals, when they rent at the Algonquin, they don't have all the best tenants. You know, sometimes you get people to come in and they're not the best guests. I'm sorry, they're not the best guests, and I don't see how we can be successful with this, given how it is right now. And I apologize to staff. They obviously did a lot of work and gave a lot of thought to it. But again, going back, I think we just put a fee on it and suggest some best practices and see where it goes from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Brew.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that, as I mentioned before, I think that there needs to be a balance struck between the rights of the existing property owners, neighbors, and neighborhoods, and people who want to have an Airbnb. And I think one of the challenges is with the way this is laid out right now, if a neighbor has a problem, they have to complain. And it's a very passive system. They have to go through a bureaucracy. They have to wait. And really, it's the neighbor and the adjacent landowners that are the ones that are going to be suffering, or if you have problems. Most Airbnb owners, they have good tenants, they're reputable, but there's always a bad apple in every barrel. The other thing is, that was mentioned earlier, if we do nothing, then we have a totally unregulated system with no rules, because that's what we have right now. And there's no provision in our existing bylaws for Airbnbs, and they're unregulated. So we have to have something. And I think that we're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place at this point, but I think there's a balance that can be struck somehow, and I don't have all the answers, between protecting the rights of adjacent property owners while still allowing people who are interested in having Airbnbs to have them. And this is a very onerous regulation. I agree with that. But somehow we have to strike that balance and come up with a solution that makes some sense for all taxpayers and all people in the town of St. Andrews. Thank you.
I think we need to pull in what's the next steps. So get various opinions. We've had some that agreed to go to first reading, some that want to delay. Staff's apathetic to get to a poll of what everyone wants to do.
Could we not do a first reading, but do a public consultation of some sort?
Or we can, what staff's perception of bylaw readings is. Right, what our perception of bylaw readings is. The first one is where we kind of put our interpretation of what is best practice. And then it's really up to you guys to carry the card. And like you said, we're trying to reach your audience the first reading. But having said that, I wouldn't put out the first reading because first reading is an indication that council's in somewhat agreement.
Not there.
It is my preference. That way, you know, if you throw something that council doesn't agree with whatsoever, it's not going to change the this is the way I interpret it, but whatever council wants to do. You can put it out as this if you want, and have a lot of consultations and have discussions on it, but I just need to know what council wants to do. But our practice has been is that first reading is where council as a group agrees that at least the first draft is in the form that they agree to.
My thoughts on it is that we need to do some more work before it goes to first reading. I wanted to go to first reading to the public. I agree with Councilor Harrison that we need to go to the operators. But I think in this forum, I think, look how much discussion we've had tonight just amongst us. I mean, we sent this out to all the Airbnb people, we inundated. I don't think it's quite there in sync with what we would support, right? The way it is right now. But I do think it has to be regulated. I agree. We have to have some regulation because we have none now, and it's a free-for-all. And but I think that I also agree with Deputy Mayor that you know we don't have to do this overnight. So maybe we're just rushing. Maybe we just need to do a little more homework. And I'm quite concerned that if we're going to stand up now, I don't know if we are or not, but stand up now and say, you know, regulating Airbnbs is not the way to better long-term housing. That's for other things we need to be taking on, or somebody needs to take on the long-term as that intersects. You know, it's a long-term problem, but it's a development problem. We need to find developers to build long-term housing. That's, you know, rather than us trying to get Airbnb people to stop doing short-term housing. You know, and we still haven't given our staff any instruction in terms of their background document that said, here's an option, here's an option, here's an option. Which ones do we want to look at further? Which ones do we not want to do? So I think we should send it back to the drawing board and then have it come back again and take another look at it before we go to first reading.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I guess one for me is that because how this may or may not affect the zoning bylaw and or at least my zoning bylaw at the very least.
And just to follow up on that a little bit, I agree 100%. It doesn't affect the zoning. Xander's kind of come to a rock or hard place because actually the zoning is under the government side or the bylaw people based. And that's not his job from Tennessee Andrews yet. So he kind of gave us some frameworks, and this is where probably we can start. It's not really my place to stay because we're not government expert. But you're right. And I guess it goes back to this council suggestion earlier for somebody who would take out the phrasing relating to the short-term rental bylaw, the zoning bylaw, so we can get that put behind us and you work on this over the winter, or you can hold up everything till we get this done. reminding you that we're talking about the number of meetings we have already, this is probably a couple of, at least one night of meetings, or not two.
Yeah, I don't know if you have the ideas for a transitionary way to do it, let's something very care bones in zoning. And then when this gets done, we just change it to how we want.
Well, and that's things that, you know, as the very minimum, all you have to do is go revert back to the word. And then when we start to move this through, we can do the amendment to this one, planning zone bylaw as required to align that. Just so you have all three readings at once to bring this into place.
Also, Mr. Spear, I think that Councilor Harrison is right. I'm a bit concerned, more than a bit concerned about how our regulatory framework puts us in a liability situation about trying to inspect people's houses to see whether they're, and we could end up, I'm not saying that shouldn't be done, but who should do it, and we should get some legal input to that to make sure that we're not overdoing and putting ourselves in jeopardy.
Yeah.
Well, that's clear as mud.
Yeah. Your worship, if I may, the zoning bylaws, it's currently written, basically says there's a permitting process. That's all it says, essentially. And I would challenge staff, if you can come up with a simplified process that protects neighborhoods and adjacent property owners, that works for everyone, I think we can probably put this to bed relatively quickly. But it's got to be a simple process, and right now we're looking at 12 pages of bylaw. And I think that some of the potential Airbnb operators are probably just got reams of comments for us. And at the same time, I'm not sure if, as I mentioned before, if the issues of protecting adjacent property owners have been fully addressed. So those are the two, I think, big issues before us right now. And if we can come up with something simple that protects adjacent property owners and neighborhoods, I think we've hit a home run.
Your worship, I appreciate Councillor Grew's comments, but that's not a concern, but that's not why we're doing this. It has to do with, there's a number of factors of why young workers and students cannot find a place to live here. And I understand that you don't want to be disruptive, but there is a bigger issue is why this all came forward. So it's either we're going to stick to that issue or we're not. Because to be honest, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, the actual amount of complaints that we get from Airbnbs in this community is minimal. Like for the most part, you know, it might be a situation where parking on the street might be a little bit of a headache or something, but like, I don't think that there's a lot of noise complaints from Airbnbs or a lot of garbage complaints from Airbnbs. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that is the reason that this came about.
I can say Deputy Mayor, there's nothing that's come to the office recently that's been looking up to double check it. Noise would be most easily enforceable one for that. Probably that gets out of control. There's nothing. As I said, there's someone will sneak out a pylon after off the street so they can bring in neighbors. And I think I respect Councilor Bruce's concerns. It's a good one because there's stakeholders in this town. If you have things that people constantly go. But I guess the original intent of the bylaw from staff's perspective is really to control the market. And if that's changed, that's fine. But that was really why this was put in place, was to make it harder and more heavily regulated industry. We thought we were reading the little council at that point in time.
In fairness to staff, I think they were. I think though that once we saw it, I don't think any of us saw it so regulated to that level. But this isn't anything that staff read wrong. It's nothing that you read wrong from hearing from the public when we had the municipal plan session here. I heard many people in the community voice their concerns over it. So it didn't come out of nowhere. But I just think when you see it on paper, it feels a little too regulated. And like I said, we've already implemented a 3% charge on everything they do. So they're going to have to show their books. They're going to have to track properly. And as well with COVID, I think you're naturally going to see with those two factors the numbers naturally go down. So the question is it, since it's in our municipal plan, does it have to be done this year, or can it be done 3 years from now if we see that number of 49 or whatever it is start going to 58, 59? Because we might, it might have already self-leveled without us even knowing it too, is the other thing. I do think that there's some value in looking at the how many properties can one person own for Airbnb. I do think, but for a lot of people in this community, and I know a lot of them, they don't live here, but they come here a month a year and they use the other months to justify paying the price it costs to have a home in this town. Between the property taxes and everything else,
It's just too big of an investment.
it's too big of an investment, and that's why a lot of people have them. So I think it's about leveling it all out. I think staff did what was asked, but I think when we saw it, and I think it's not when we see it on paper what we wanted. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I think the other element that I heard back in the discussions was that there should be some person, whether it's the owner or an agent, that is held accountable on site or close to site, so that if there is a problem, there's someone that the town or the neighbor can hold accountable for what goes on there in the building, because that's one of my biggest concerns, and I think that can be still handled this way. And I think Councillor Gru's comments are good. We could make it, maybe we could put the KISS principle to this and make it regulatory enough, but not overly regulatory. But we don't have to do this in a month. I don't know about 3 years, but I don't know. We could do it before we leave, maybe, and we think we're happy with it then, but we don't have to push this. And I know there's other stuff that probably at this time of the year is probably more important than Airbnb for us in our remaining few months to get done. So
I think the staff's approach with the annual license for Airbnbs is a sound one, in that it gives a recourse if things do go wrong, whereby you can revoke a license, and that provides the staff with a bit of clout in terms of regulating Airbnbs. So that's a very powerful tool that I think is very positive.
So staff, another stab at it, but not by next week. How's that?
But your worship, this will delay our passage, I think, of our zoning bylaw, because the zoning bylaw references the permit process. And if we don't have a permit process in place, then we've got a void there.
Yep, your worship. Can we just remove that from the zoning? It's in our municipal plan, so council can go through 3 readings and add that back to the zoning bylaw. We don't have to figure every single thing out. We figured out a municipal plan, a secondary plan, and a zoning bylaw. Is it going to be 100% what we need? Probably not. But like, that's a lot of work and a lot of framework that most councils can't get done.
But the problem is, if you remove that reference, then Airbnbs are not permissible in the town. That's the catch-22 we're in, is we stripped it out of the zoning bylaw and we referenced the permit process. If you take that out, then Airbnbs are not allowed, are not permitted in the town.
Well, maybe we'll have to have that.
Or maybe we just put that they are permitted.
Under what terms? So that's the problem.
Under the terms that they give us 3%.
Yeah.
You know, if you're Mr. and Mrs. whatever living down on Queen Street, you want to take your family for the summer and jump in an RV and go across Canada and rent your house out when you're gone. Right now, according to this, you have to pay $500, right? Unless you did, like, in case you have a $250 penalty on top of that and pay 3%. And I think just paying 3% is enough. I don't think anybody would be happy to hear that they can't do that. So in that way, I would say people also took in students if they had space, people in the summertime if they went away, if they had the time to get their house ready to rent it, they might consider it. But under this, I don't think people are going to be happy to hear that they don't really have that option
to keep the simple idea though, I mean, we could just do it short, like, as a stopgap, an extraordinary, simple permitting process, which effectively says pay your look it up in the bylaw, pay your 3% there, while we take it under consideration, and then, which will hopefully be before next season, you know?
With an annual permit.
Well, and maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but I thought the permitting process and the fees for permitting was to know who was doing it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for us to raise a whole bunch more money for the town.
Well, no, I assume it would be levy as the 3%. Right?
That's what I'm saying, levy, but a permitting fee was because you have to get a permit so that we know that you're doing what you're doing, right?
But all to say, we can do a dead simple stopgap as an annual permit, and then either us or next council that goes that long can figure out the next phase.
Okay.
Kind of comes down to the difference between permit and fee, and I've raised this before. A permit implies that you have to get permission to do it, whereas a fee implies that you have to pay to do it. And I think we just
Except
get people to pay to do it.
essentially the 3% is collected from the person who's renting the space, not from the Airbnb person. They're not paying the fee. If they are, they're foolish because you've added into the cost of your.
Like the current tourist levy.
Yeah, it is. Well, exactly, it is. Okay,
Just to address Mr. Bouchard, though, I think we still have, I think the permitting, we use the cheap permit because A, we want to know where everybody is. And B, there still may be zoning issues that may pop up that we have to know. So
yes.
the permission can be very light, but we don't want someone setting up an Airbnb in a church, for instance. You know, whatever, you know, just as an example, that's just to make sure that they're following at least some very basic format. We can make it as easy as possible, but we don't want it to be the Wild West out there either, I don't think.
I'll let it slide.
Okay, folks.
There's an E2.
E2, yes.
E2. Sorry.
Yep.
Oh, you have two. Is that the last item?
Well, I've got something that is kind of meat up to, and the council would mind entertaining it. Councilor, I want to speak to it, but what it is the medical center has something that's called an autoclave. What an autoclave is basically a disinfection thing for you have to do certain things. And the example I have here is you can do stitches up there, for instance. In it. That's going to be replaced $7,000. Not a non-budgeted item for some of the cuts we made and things. It's certainly financially a reasonable request of the council, and maybe the deputy mayor, excuse me, if I have to speak on it.
There's not a whole lot to speak of other than I don't think our wellness center, our current health center, has asked us for a lot of equipment, and this is something that is vital. Basically, that they don't have the ability to do it, and I can tell you that there's a lot of positive things to come for the new wellness center that we're all looking forward to. And I think that this is a vital service that we have to have. So for me, this is a no-brainer. And I don't think I can even count on one hand how many times they've come to us looking for new equipment. So I think that this one would be one that we should consider having for a new facility.
We're already asking councils that it's okay to add to the agenda for Monday. No decisions to make tonight.
Thank you, Your Worship. As the person who submitted this. I have two basic questions. The first one is the current autoclave, who owns that? Is that owned by the town?
Yes.
And second question, is this something that Horizon Health would be willing to pay for? Okay.
And the hope is that very soon that this will be shared between not just one doctor, but but 2 doctors. So to have one have to pay for their own makes no sense. So I really feel this is a municipal asset that we should own.
And council, just, even though if you look closely at the quote on the back, it says the private corporations, but really the town buying it, and regardless of who's in there, it belongs to the town. And the first article was 30+ years, so this will last.
And although I don't think we're going to talk about this tonight, this is fine by me, but I think we also have to face the fact that there will be some equipment owned by the town when we move into the new building. This to me is just in getting out ahead of getting something we need right now, but it would be something we'd want in the wellness center anyway, right? And there's a lot of other things that we might have to face in terms of equipment.
Why are there 2 items listed on the invoice?
One's bigger, that's all.
One's bigger.
If you look at the one says 5 gallon, the other one says 10.
Okay, so it's not like we don't need both to operate.
No, it's 2 different sizes for the lazy to be paper.
And I did ask your worship if this would be suffice for 2 doctors and the nurse practitioner for the future, and it would be suffice.
Is that the 5 gallon would be sufficient? Or should we go with the 6 gallon?
No, the one that they identified in the motion is suffice.
5 gallon.
Request of them. I know your worship, just following the protocol of the procedural bylaw, someone has to move and second that.
I'll move, your worship.
Thank you, council.
Are we bringing this next week or are we voting on it?
Yeah, all this is, worship is, the vote is to allow it to move forward, where it doesn't introduce the agenda.
Good.
It'll come forward next week.
Yeah, for final resolution.
Okay, good. All right. Councilor Gumichon.
Thank you, Worship. I didn't necessarily prepare anything, but last meeting I missed. I was arriving home at 6 o'clock last week. I got a call. I recovered it, so I forgot, to be honest. It was a busy day at work. Over the past year, we've gone from 7 o'clock meetings somehow back to 6 o'clock meetings. I think we had some special meetings that were at 6:30, and then slowly we seem to transition to 6 o'clock meetings. I think that one of the priorities of this council is to help identify ways to make serving on council accessible to all sorts of different people. You shouldn't necessarily have to be retired to be on council. You should be able to have a family and not be rushing off to council meetings that start quite so early. I think 6 o'clock is a bit of a stretch. I don't have any kids, but I find it hard to get here by 6. Eating dinner here a few meetings ago, and not to complain if everybody else is good with 6 o'clock. I'll continue to go with 6, but I think it's we should decide what time we meet and stick to it. And that was always 7, and it worked quite well. So I would propose that we go back to meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councilor Gumichon.
I concur with that. I find it tough sometimes to make, essentially leave work early, which, you know, if I'm busy, then you rather skip the meeting or leave work too early. Or so, I mean, I think there's a reason we did 7 o'clock way back then and put it in the procedural.
Let's poll, Councilor.
Yeah, just a quick question, Your Worship, and perhaps the clerk can address this. The procedural bylaw, does it say 6 or 7?
After you, Your Worship, the procedure bylaw only refers to a 7 o'clock meeting for the regular council. And all other meetings are not actually specified with the time. That's why we were fluctuating, working from 6 o'clock and also for council to note the number of meetings you guys have had with the municipal plan, the secondary plan, and everything else that we've been going through. That's where we've been doubling up meetings so that we try not to have 2 or 3 days meetings in a week. Fine with whatever time you guys want to set. I'm just to say the meetings happen 2+ hours long each. Right now we're sitting at, even for this meeting, an hour and a half. So just to let you guys know, 2.5 hours is a standard time of practice. If you do wish on a procedural bylaw to postpone or meeting at a certain point after 2.5 hours, that's sort of within the process now.
then we do have to post another meeting within 5 days under the procedural bylaw to finish off that 90 days. So just to let you know the process and why we've been doing earlier meetings, because of the amount of information you guys have been digesting, the amount of information you've been putting out to the public, and the amount of time you guys have had to actually discuss and have this. So there were a number of times we went from 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night. So I'm just putting it there to council. That's why we've been having meetings at 6 o'clock, because we do take a lot of discussion.
Your Worship, the other thing I'd like to address, probably it ties into this, is that in our procedural bylaw, we have an item there that says if the meeting goes 2.5 hours, then we have to vote as a group to continue. And I think having meetings that piggyback on one another defeats the whole purpose of having that motion. Because if you start one meeting at 6 and the next meeting at 7 or whatever, you're there forever. So I think in part with that, I think we should, as a council, discontinue the practice of piggybacking meetings, because it creates for a very, very long evening. And some councillors have difficulty coming to those earlier meetings.
I think too, we do need a hard cap on the time.
Yeah.
And possibly we need a hard cap on our priorities, and just say, here's the 5 things, 2 things, 3 things we're going to get done by next May. You know, if it goes that long, and if we don't get anything else done, well, we've done a lot, and just move on. We think it's on a pretty big list, but maybe it needs to be shortened.
Mm-hmm.
I also, I find that we have a lot of things that get rushed into the door. They get added to meetings, right?
Yeah.
Almost every meeting, stuff gets added. Like tonight, for
Okay.
example, we had stuff added. I'm not saying that's bad, but the bottom line is hard to regulate. And I'm kind of thinking we need to relook at the whole thing. And I'm quite happy if we want to sit down and say, okay, Mr. Knopper, we can meet every week, you and I can say, what can we get done in 2 hours? You're the expert, tell us. How many issues can we talk about in 2 hours? And we can stand here and say, okay, you got 5 minutes, you got 2 minutes. But I think one of the things that I hear out on the street from the general public is that they like the fact that we have fulsome discussions and things at our council, and that, you know, and I don't get complaints that the people that follow us on Facebook are not turning off because we take too long. They're in fact calling back and saying, you guys really had a good discussion the other night. Now I know what you guys are talking about. Eh? So I think we have to balance it. I understand that. And so if we, you know, do we want to go through a list again and have that exercise soon that just says, okay, we're only going to do these 4 things, and then we're going to stop, and we're not going to take on any more issues. Even if they come up, we're going to say, no, we'll give that to the next guys, whenever that is. By the way, I hope that we'll find out very soon when that is, that the provincial government will say, this is the date of the municipal election, so that everybody can work forwards and backwards from that, and we can decide, then we can make this decision. So I'm okay with all of that to limit the amount of work that we're doing. I mean, maybe we're going to have to. We can't be all things to all people, but it seems a shame that if we are the people that know everything or almost everything, we think about what the issues are, to just stand it down and have somebody start all over again. That's what they do in Fredericton every time the government changes. They stand, we've only had 50 years of government in the last 100 years because it's all majority governments, and they stand down for 2 years after they change governments, right? This should be a continuum, and I think, but I'm open to make these meetings shorter. And by the way, we are running into the dilemma that we have for our staff. You know, they're tied up for that amount of time, and that's after working all day most days, right? So that costs us down the road, and we have to make sure that we do that. So if we're going to set 2.5 hours, then it's 2.5 hours and we quit. But what I don't like to do is to say, when we do get followings of the public, they come here, they're waiting for item number 6, and we say, sorry, we're not doing that tonight. And then we walk out, right? We can't do that. So we have to plan this a little more carefully in the beginning and say, no, we can do this in 2 hours, and we stop in 2 hours.
The other thing that comes with that, Your Worship, is I think we have to slow the pace down somewhat, because right now council is meeting 2 times a week for the next, 2 months? A month.
Really on this month, we have budget discussions. Monday night, you will have a presentation on transportation master plan at 6 o'clock. That was on the 7th. Then you'll have council meeting, then we have budget meeting on the 7th, then you will have a meeting on that Monday, that's Tuesday. Our next meeting will be the 14th, where you will have budget discussion and potentially approve that in zoning bylaw, but we can still discuss that. Then your next meeting tentatively will be Wednesday the 21st, which will be budget again, and that will be budget number 5. And then you're to the end of your actual committee meeting, and it's still within their depending on process, we need to have a meeting on the zoning bylaw, and if you're happy with the zoning bylaw, set a crack, public hearing objections, and calls to committee. So just there, that's just that stuff. So that's the next month. So it really comes down to council being strong from the budget discussions and being strong from the zoning bylaw for meetings to either progress or to extend and have meetings. But otherwise, that's all staff right now are bringing forward beyond what was presented.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. So since we were doing the round table on what time we preferred to start the meeting, I'm good with whatever time falls for council. Signed up, so I'll be here either way unless it's moose season. But for me, 6 p.m. is a better start time, simply for the fact that I don't know how many times we had meetings past 10 p.m., which after our work day is it's a long day. And for me personally, 3 young children, 6 o'clock gives me a chance to help tuck them in at night. 7 p.m. doesn't. So my vote is 6 p.m. And then as far as the meetings, if we're saying we don't want to meet as much, I would say that we shouldn't get into the transportation plan until you get done the municipal plan, the secondary plan, the zoning bylaw, because we can't have it both ways. We can't add on a major document while we have other ones on the go. Otherwise, we are going to meet more. It's that simple, and that's nothing staff can do about that. So either we hold that off or we do it. But if we do it, we should get used to meeting more often, because that's a big, big document too for us to get into. So that's it for me.
Is that what Hunter said, 6 o'clock?
Bedtime's 8:30, right? So I got a chance. 7 p.m. I don't have a chance.
So I withdraw my.
No, don't do it based on. Yeah.
I'm for 6 as well, because I'm only about a half an hour past Hunter when I have to go.
I think, if I can, Your Worship, I think for our staff, 6 o'clock is probably, I won't speak for staff, but I would assume that it's better because they want to get home earlier.
It's a little easier, we tend to stay through anyway.
Yeah.
But everybody else, by 9 o'clock, you're so tired, it's hard to think. So earlier start just means we still got prime thinking capacity.
Mr. Knopper, what tragedy would befall us if we take Deputy Mayor's advice and stand down the transportation bylaw until at least after we finalize the budget and finalize the...
I just postpone and let the engineers know that you're not ready to have their made.
But I'm not saying give it to the next council. I'm saying let's leave it till after we put to bed the budget and
the new year.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess it's already come into it. The hope was originally to be in time and place to cover the capital budget, but because we put that off a little bit, and the capital budgets were about to up by a month, it's not going to happen. Right. So there probably is nothing. It's just we're going to lose a little bit of momentum because we're going to be a year between when the committee broke up and the council has a look at it. Maybe it's not that hard of a document to pick up and we look at either.
Okay, everybody agree? Let's do that. Because it's just too much. It's not that it won't get done. It's just that maybe you're saying that the biggest drawback would be if we we wanted to make big expenditures because of the transportation master plan, that's not going to get in for next year. Yeah.
That'd be correct.
Okay. But that doesn't mean nothing will get in for next year. If there were some things, some of the stuff isn't expensive, it's just, and some is. Like roundabouts.
And just to say, as the clerk said, that actually 7 o'clock will still be the regular start time for the regular council meeting.
Right.
Unless the council wants to amend that.
That's fine.
Yeah. And we could amend it later if everyone likes it, but for now, we'll continue at 7 o'clock.
And maybe Mr. Knopper and I'll have a discussion about time before next week.
Here's the question. The Zoom rule of you can only miss one quarter of meetings, or whatever is that only regular meetings, or does that include all the other meetings? Like, could I just Zoom in with immunity other than the regular meeting?
It's been
so for your worship, just on it, it's been in general course of the Local Governance Act to be any and all meetings in recourse to council. So the 25% of meetings could be electronic versions, and that can be special council meetings, public hearings of rejection, and regular council meetings, so it counts as all your meetings. But under the provisions of the COVID regulations of the Emergency Measures Act, technically we have electronic meetings carried through it.
So until they pull the
Emergency Measures Act?
Yeah, until they pull that, we can Zoom in as much as we want. Because I mean, for me, like, want to work later, then I can basically just tune in from work and do two things. Not I would do two things at once, but
the technology.
We're not quite there yet. The technology in here, if we can get to that hopefully soon, then
right.
We'll do that.
Although they're large audience here, maybe we could go back to having our non-regular meetings back in the confines of our houses. They're Zoom and just have a regular meeting.
Because I assume that helps, although I know that one of you was usually at the office doing it, and yeah, although you live closer by, I think anyways, but yeah, I assume that helps a bit in terms of getting home on time and all that.
Yeah, your worship.
But this will be ones that some people kind of like the start time. It'll be all over the place. But I appreciate all staff's effort, CHGO helping us. But since we got together, our sound quality has gone way downhill. And a lot of people would have liked to probably have heard what happened tonight, and they couldn't hear us. So I don't, as much as I like getting together for public information, everybody being in their own home actually was better to get communication out there right now. So it's a trade-off right now. I know staff's working on it. I know that this type of equipment right now is hard to get your hands on too, because everybody's ordering it. But the sound quality, I tried to listen to the one that I missed, and it's just not there. And then tonight it's the same thing. That the sound quality's been not what the public was hoping for, and they're very frustrated because they want to be engaged, but they can't be in the way that we're doing it right now.
Clearly, we see the benefit, the lack of benefit of meeting in person because no one showed up tonight.
I think Mr. Knopper's suggestion that we do the regular meeting here and do the other committee meetings in our own homes, because the sound was great, as you say, Deputy Mayor, when you're in your own home. Everybody heard everybody speaking and whatnot. It was a lot more equal. It's on YouTube. And the staff is doing their very best, and I appreciate everything that they do, because I know they work on my house and upgraded to Zoom now. But I would make that suggestion that we do that, do our regular meeting here, face to face, and do all the other meetings on our what do you want to call them, PDAs or computers or iPads, whatever you have at home for the rest of the meetings. And the 6 o'clock start would be great for me if I could get home and be home, but sometimes I cannot always get there by 6:30. That's why.
Through your worship, with a suggestion of 6:30, would that be optional for guests?
No bedtime for
Either way, I signed up to be on council, so it's whatever council. Like, it was 7 when I started, so I'm fine with 7 if that's what council wants.
I would say we stay with 6 for now, and we see whether that causes a problem, and we hope that the regular meeting will be at 7, and the regular meeting will be here, and all the rest of the meetings until we make another adjustment if made necessary, or we get a technology breakthrough where, you know, the sound, but I would much prefer, I think I mentioned this before, when we first found the way of the Regional Service Commission to put 20 people, 25 people in the same board tables, then the executive director there polled everybody, and 20 out of 20 commissioners said, we don't want to get together in person because it works so much better or so much more efficient by doing it on Zoom. So I agree with that.
If I could, I'd remind everyone we had an unwanted visitor on Zoom at our meeting.
I missed that.
Well,
I watched it though.
and our schools aren't using Zoom, they're using Microsoft Teams, and we have the opportunity to use Microsoft Teams. We have that as part of our office suite with our email and all that stuff. And Facebook can be problematic. You can be on there under some other username. There are conversations happening during the meeting that we don't know what's going on, that we shouldn't have to be watching. I've dropped in a few times. People are talking and bantering back and forth during the meeting. I'm not sure that Facebook is the ideal platform for us to be broadcasting. That's my opinion. And neither is Zoom. I think Teams, which is something that education used a lot during like last spring during the pandemic, and it's a much more controlled platform.
My only problem was we would limit other people getting in, because like Facebook especially is quite universal, at least for people over there. And then Zoom is quite universal. Like, I don't know if I have this other one, Teams or Zoom or whatever.
In the same way that Zoom is not secure, Facebook is not secure either. And this is a formal meeting, and we're broadcasting it out and taking questions from these platforms that may not be the person that says they are, may not. I get these are interesting times, but if we don't have to use those platforms, we should be using ones that are more secure, in my opinion. But I'm just one.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to echo Councillor Gomeshel's concerns about Facebook, because I've noticed in Facebook, it's an unsecure media, and there's a parallel conversation taking place while we're having our meeting. And it may or may not be productive. It may be undermining what we're trying to do as a council, where people are saying, well, this councillor's full of it, or that one's doing that, the mayor doesn't know what he's doing, and so on and so forth. And I think that that is something, I don't know if there's a way we can shut off the comments on Facebook. I don't think there is, but I think that I'm not knowledgeable.
There is a way you can shut off comments, and you just could tell them to email in any questions they have.
I like the comments. I mean, not the substance of each and every comment. I do like things that are early, and you get an argument or whatever going. Like Shakespeare drama. Well, it kind of tells us where some people are at.
Well, it's kind of awkward, because I know there was one meeting a month or two ago where we were holding the meeting, and I decided, well, I'm going to start responding to some of these comments on Facebook. And while we were talking as a council, I'm holding a second meeting on Facebook at the same time, which is kind of awkward. And I think that's not the intent.
Well, Mr. Knopper, can you give some thought to that, whether there's a better way?
Yeah, after your worship, I will, and I will get back to you with all of that is all options.
I see that Microsoft Teams is advertising that they can have more than 4 or 9 people in a meeting. So I think that's a much better way to proceed.
Through your worship, just to give you an idea, the city of Spirit, I were on Microsoft Teams with the province for a COVID-19 tabletop exercise. There were 150 representatives on that. So I just have to look at if there's a costing model with that, or what's the expansion onto that to have multiple people at once. I just have to look at that.
or if we run into the same technical issues as far as the sound and stuff too. Maybe much reflect what's going on here. We may have to invest in microphones and things just to make it a little bigger.
Could we just put those nice iPads we got right here and vote?
The issue with the iPads was when we did try it, we were getting feedback as well through the iPads. So because we're so close to each other with the microphones and the speakers, it was causing issues actually. Like I would pick up one person perfectly well, and we pick up or triple on, and they're talking to the iPad. So it's trying to find that technology balance.
We'll come up with see if we can come up with a better solution, Your Worship, because I think this online has really opened up democratically to people and transparency, and people have loved it. 100% of people, lots of people want it. So I hate to see us give it up, but certainly it's a best practice, not needed as far as what we should do.
I think we have to be careful because it's opened it up to computer literate individuals. We have another segment of our population that are not computer literate that aren't there. And they're not seen.
They're not here either.
And they're not here either, but.
Well, yeah, except if we continue with the regular meeting being broadcast on CHCO, I get a lot of feedback from people that aren't necessarily computer literate, but they do watch it on CHCO.
I think that's a good idea.
Through your worship, when we were doing regular council meetings via Zoom, they were taking our feed afterwards and using it as the CHCO feed. So
Okay.
having done that here, the more from discussion with them, the more happy we'll go back to regular council meetings.
Look, does anybody have a burning desire to go through the registers? Does anybody have something that they've already want to talk to us about?
Your Worship, maybe there's just one item. Back during budget time, Councilor Drew brought up about coming up with the subdivision plan, like the first, we had the first phase and staff kind of held off until the COVID, also with the top of the launch, that kind of messed things up. So it's Public Works 200901. And so staff hasn't done that. We just want to see if you want to move forward with that now. Or see if we have a quote to about it. Yeah, just
Sorry, you got that quote?
I quote to do it, although I guess it depends what you want to look for and bring a quote forward. And because it's not going to be a full set of drawings that tomorrow someone can go. It's like a conceptual drawing. This is what the streets would look like and the store would look like and stuff like that. But my only recommendation is, or my consideration, sorry, is I know that this Regional Service Commission is doing a housing study, and that would add credence. And you might want to wait till that's completed, maybe go over to next year, then you can incorporate that into that. As you're aware, St. Andrews doesn't have a lot of room for expansion, especially multiple resident units. And so if you kind of knew what the market was, they could provide, incorporate that into it.
Is there a way to, not force, that'd be the wrong word, but engineer a meeting with BTI and those doing housing studies, so they talk about the land behind MBCC? So we know who in BTR, whatever one it is, who's the guy there that someone needs to talk to wake them up to the fact that that should be developed somehow? And like, is there some way to say, hey, you should be at that table?
I think we started that discussion with the Minister, the Attorney General, she's the Attorney General tomorrow, a few months ago. Everyone admits DTI is a dark hole and doesn't play nicely, but sometimes it's, anyway, now we got to work with them and maybe a trip to Farragut and have a further discussion. We're not the only municipality that has use of their land. Sorry, wants to use their land, and that they may have further plans with that. So I think it'd be good that, I don't think this housing review has to be necessarily perfect, but I think council should probably visit there once they determine that there's a whole lot of land there, even if it's not specifically for NBCC student use, it's some type of MR2 that's in prime area within walking distance of core services in town, that should be expressed. And
well, even with the Passamaquoddy Lodge idea, I mean, what an awesome place to put it. If you have the humanities students, you have the culinary, you have all these students that could like intern and, you know, and work well as something like that there. But I just fear like it'll never, it'll be as it's always been.
I'd echo that, Your Worship, but also the CIOs that piqued my interest in having some kind of a drawing going into the next municipal election, some sort of a subdivision plan. It's a visual that could be part of election debate. Hopefully the next council isn't all affiliated. Things that the townspeople could actually see and formulate some opinions on would be quite valuable going into for the next council.
Create some excitement. The other thing, Mr. Spear, is there any possibility of putting forward a proposal with DTI to maybe purchase the land behind the NBCC or for $1 or something like that, so it can be developed for the public or whatever? Or are they ready to dump that land?
You can always ask.
Well, if you don't ask, you don't get.
So my grandmother used to always say,
At least put the motion forward if you'd like to purchase it and then negotiate the price after the fact.
Yeah.
don't forget,
$1 is a good starting point.
That was a good starting point.
and we might get a new minister tomorrow, and therefore we can make the rounds and write the new minister. Let's have some discussions.
Because they may not even be aware of the potential of that property or that the land is valuable for the town for development and you know, because they're a big organization and this is a tiny speck in their portfolio.
I mean, and it may be beyond what we can do with the time we have remaining, but it's too bad, yeah, we just didn't create a plan. And say, hey, if you want, we could do this.
Yeah.
And then just have it so we can sell a dream, and then we always kill our dream, but you know, at least it's not.
I
I
think
guess we're back to Kevin, sorry, just to wrap this up, it started with my original question, do you want me to do phase 1 of the study or not? Do we spend $8,000 to do that? Does this council want to do it? I think we don't need it, it's already approved in the budget, it's just how well we staffed to figure this out.
I would add it to the budget for next year.
I'd put it as a motion for the next meeting. Are we going to do it?
Do we have a place,
And then
do you have a
by
place
next-
to take that from though, or is this going to be overages? Oh, out of that line item, okay.
Well, I just want to say, it wasn't included in any of the COVID budget analysis, and I think that was always. So I just think someone can base.
I move that we add it to the agenda for next meeting.
I second that.
Okay.
What's that?
Closed, yes, no. Yep. Already. We need to go into closed.
I move.
Before you do, Worship, this question period.
There were different grading questions in the Zoom section here. Facebook's questions were all acceptable. So I'm not too concerned about those ones. So I'm not sure how we get the good audio back from here. The question was, it's another one here. Actually, no, it was just about the short-term rental process. They're saying it shouldn't be rushed within that.
Council.
Yeah, council. We use the best practice of the official to show us the right way to go. There is support long-term rentals. And they were asking, is there going to be a separate structure system in place? Again, using the good neighbor concepts, making sure that you have responses back and forth, and that they feel that the licensing might be too high, especially at $500 is too much consideration. Beyond that, that's
what's there. Okay, good. So just comments on what we did.
More comments than other questions.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Knopf. So we'll wait for Councillor Harrison. We'll go into closed session.
closed yet. You guys have to move to closed.
We're just going to move there. So do what you want.
Shut down the mics. I want to do it.
Yeah, Your Worship.
Oh, okay. Your Worship, can we move to closed and then? Yep. So you need a motion and seconder. You need a break.
We need a break first to go.
So Councillor Acker, you move to close. Do we have a second there?
Just so I know.
Thank you.
Councillor Gumichelle.
There you go. Thank you.
All in favor?
Okay, out of close, 8:34. Adjourned.
You want
Thank
this
you,
back?
council.
Wednesday night, 6 o'clock, budget.